The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Space Council stretched beyond what any human eye could see. Inside this enormous structure, thousands upon thousands of alien beings filled every seat, balcony, and floating platform. Their shapes were beyond imagination. Some looked like walking trees with multiple arms. Others resembled giant insects with glowing eyes, and many had forms that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Admiral Kim Jae sat alone in the center of it all in what they called the Defendant's Chair. The chair itself was made of some strange metal that felt cold, even through his uniform. Around him the noise was overwhelming. Clicking sounds came from the insect-like creatures, deep rumbling voices echoed from the massive rock beings, and high-pitched whistles pierced the air from the floating gas creatures. But underneath all these different sounds, there was something else, the clear tone of mockery and disgust. The humans were not welcome here. Kim Jae had served in Earth's military for over 30 years. He had seen combat in the asteroid belt wars, commanded ships during the Mars Rebellion, and negotiated peace treaties with hostile colonies. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. Here he was, representing all of humanity before beings who saw his entire species as nothing more than annoying insects. Behind him, Dr. Park Soo sat quietly in the observer section. To anyone watching, she looked like a simple scientist taking notes on her tablet, but the truth was far more complex. Hidden inside her skull, a tiny neural implant was working overtime, recording everything it could see and hear. Every ship that flew past the massive windows, every defensive weapon that guarded the station, every piece of technology that these aliens thought was so superior to human engineering, all of it was being catalogued and analyzed. The Vorthak Prime Speaker rose from its throne-like seat. This creature was particularly strange to human eyes. It looked like a walking crystal formation, with light pulsing through its transparent body in patterns that somehow formed words. When it spoke, the sound came not from any mouth, but from vibrations that filled the entire chamber. The human species will cease all military expansion beyond the Sol system, the Prime Speaker announced. Its voice was amplified by translation machines that turned the crystal vibrations into words that humans could understand. Your primitive warships are a nuisance to civilized space. You will confine yourselves to your single star system and cease bothering your betters. As these words echoed through the chamber, the reaction was immediate. Thousands of alien voices joined together in what could only be described as laughter, though it sounded like nothing humans had ever heard before. Some creatures made sounds like breaking glass, others produced deep bellowing noises, and still others created high-pitched squealing that hurt human ears. Kim Jae had expected this reaction. During the long journey to the council station, he had studied every piece of intelligence Earth had gathered about these species. He knew they saw humans as backward, primitive creatures who had barely figured out how to leave their home planet. To them, humanity's small fleet of ships was laughable compared to their massive war machines and advanced weapons. But Kim Jae also knew something they didn't. He kept his face completely calm as the laughter continued around him. Years of military training had taught him how to hide his emotions, even in the most stressful situations. Inside, however, he felt a mixture of anger and anticipation. These creatures had no idea what humanity was truly capable of. "We understand your concerns," Kim Jae replied when the laughter finally died down. His voice was steady and respectful, giving no hint of what he was really thinking. "But perhaps you should reconsider who you're dealing with." The words seemed harmless enough, but something in his tone made a few of the more intelligent aliens pause. Most, however, found his response even more amusing than before. The laughter that erupted this time was even louder and more mocking than the first. None of them realized that these would be the last moments they would ever feel superior to humanity. War Chief Maltheus was a sight that would terrify most humans. Standing nearly 12 feet tall, his body was covered in thick armored plates that gleamed like polished metal. But what made him truly intimidating were his 4 massive arms, each one capable of crushing a human skull with ease. As the military leader of the Zephyrian Empire, he commanded respect and fear across dozens of star systems. Now he stood before the massive holographic display in the center of the council chamber. his 4 arms moving in perfect coordination as he manipulated the images floating in the air. The display showed his empire's fleet formations, thousands of warships arranged in perfect battle lines, each one bristling with weapons that could level entire cities. "Observe the power of civilized warfare," Malthus declared, his voice booming. Across the chamber, the translation devices picked up his words and broadcast them in hundreds of different languages simultaneously. "Our antimatter cannons harness the very forces that bind matter together. When we fire these weapons, we literally tear holes in reality itself." He gestured with 2 of his arms, and the holographic display zoomed in on one of his flagship vessels. The ship was enormous, easily 10 times larger than humanity's biggest warship. Along its hull, massive cannon barrels gleamed with deadly promise. A single shot from our main batteries could vaporize the entire human homeworld in minutes. Malthus continued, his voice filled with pride and contempt. "Their pathetic planet would simply cease to exist, turned into nothing but cosmic dust. These mammals barely deserve membership status in our galactic community." The crowd of alien delegates erupted in approval. The sound was like nothing heard on Earth, a mixture of roars, clicks, whistles, and vibrations that shook the very foundations of the massive station. Many of the creatures were nodding their various heads, appendages, or whatever they used, to show agreement. The crystalline Vorth delegates were particularly impressive in their show of support. These beings looked like living gemstones, their transparent bodies pulsing within a light. As they expressed their agreement with Malthus, their energy shields began to shimmer and dance around them. The shields were their greatest military achievement, barriers of pure energy that could deflect any known weapon. One of the larger Vorth crystals began to glow brighter, demonstrating how their shields could be amplified to protect entire fleets. The light show was spectacular, filling that section of the chamber with rainbow colors that shifted and moved like living things. But not everyone in the chamber was impressed by this display of alien superiority. Captain Li Do sat quietly in the observation deck, far above the main floor where the dramatic presentations were taking place. To anyone who might notice him, he appeared to be just another human observer, perhaps a military attaché or diplomatic aide. His dark eyes seemed to be watching the proceedings with mild interest, nothing more. The reality was far different. Li Do was one of Earth's most skilled intelligence officers, trained in observation techniques that would make most spies jealous. As he watched the various alien species show off their military might, his mind was working like a sophisticated computer, cataloging every detail he observed. When Malthus displayed his fleet formations, Li Do immediately spotted the weaknesses in their defensive arrangements. The Zephyrian ships were powerful, but they relied too heavily on their massive size and heavy armor. They moved slowly and predictably, like ancient battleships from Earth's past. The Vorth energy shields were more interesting, but Li Do could see the power generation systems that maintained them. Every shield had to have a source, and every source had vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone who understood the principles involved. As he continued his observations, Li Do allowed himself a small, barely visible smile. These aliens were so confident in their superiority that they were freely displaying their military secrets to anyone who cared to look. They had no idea that human intelligence officers had been studying their technologies for years, looking for exactly these kinds of weaknesses. The Trilothian ambassador, a creature that resembled a giant octopus with metallic skin, raised several of its tentacles to call for attention. "I motion to restrict human expansion to a single star system," it announced in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "These primitive beings have proven they cannot be trusted with access to civilized space. All in favor?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. 10,000 voices rose in unanimous approval, creating a sound like thunder that rolled through the chamber for nearly a minute. Not a single delegate voted against the motion. The contempt for humanity was universal among these advanced civilizations. As the voting concluded and the aliens celebrated their decision, none of them realized the truth. Hidden in laboratories across Earth and its colonies, humanity's greatest scientists had already unlocked secrets that made all of this impressive alien technology look like stone tools wielded by primitive cave dwellers. The real war was about To begin, 3 years before the humiliation at the Galactic Space Council, something extraordinary happened on Europa, one of Jupiter's frozen moons. The discovery would change everything humanity thought they knew about the universe, but at the time, it seemed like just another routine excavation mission. Dr. Choi Min had been working on Europa for almost 6 months, leading a team of archaeologists and physicists in what most people considered a waste of time and money. The ice mining operations had uncovered some unusual structures deep beneath the moon's surface, and Earth's government had sent a research team to investigate. Most officials expected them to find nothing more than interesting rock formations, or maybe some ancient ice crystals. They were wrong in ways that defied imagination. The structures they found weren't natural formations at all. They were ruins. The remains of buildings and machines created by an intelligence that had existed long before any known civilization in the galaxy. The walls were covered in symbols and equations that hurt to look at, as if they were describing concepts that human minds weren't meant to understand. Dr. Choi Min stood in the main excavation chamber, her breath visible in the frigid air despite the heating units running at full power. The chamber was enormous, carved directly into the ice with a precision that modern human technology couldn't match. Strange geometric patterns covered every surface, and in the center of the room stood what appeared to be some kind of control console, its purpose completely unknown. "These symbols," she whispered to her research partner, Dr. Bae Won, "they're not just writing, they're mathematical equations, but they describe physics that shouldn't be possible." Dr. Bae Won was a theoretical physicist, one of the smartest people on Earth when it came to understanding how the universe worked. He had spent weeks studying the symbols, running computer simulations, and trying to make sense of what they were seeing. What he had discovered kept him awake at night. "Look at this section," he said, pointing to a wall covered in intricate carvings. "These equations describe the manipulation of dark matter itself, not just detecting it or measuring it, but actually controlling it like we control electricity or magnetism. Dark matter was one of the universe's greatest mysteries. Scientists knew it existed because they could see its effects. It bent light, influenced the movement of galaxies, and made up most of the universe's mass. But no one had ever been able to touch it, see it directly, or use it for anything practical. It was like trying to grab shadows with your bare hands. Yet here, carved into walls that were millions of years old, were detailed instructions for doing exactly that. "The previous inhabitants weren't just advanced," Dr. Choi Min whispered, her voice filled with awe and terror. "They existed partially outside our reality. They could step between dimensions like we step between rooms." The implications were staggering. If these equations were correct, if the technology described in these ruins actually worked, then everything humanity thought they knew about physics was wrong. The aliens in the Galactic Space Council, with their antimatter weapons and energy shields, were playing with toys compared to what was possible. Dr. Bae Won spent the next 3 months working around the clock, barely sleeping or eating. He assembled a team of the brightest minds on Earth, swearing them all to absolute secrecy. What they were discovering was too dangerous, too powerful to let fall into the wrong hands. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Dr. Bae Won finally cracked one of the simpler equations. In a laboratory deep beneath the ice, he successfully manipulated a single particle of dark matter for exactly 0.3 seconds. It was such a small accomplishment that most people would have considered it meaningless, but Dr. Choi Min understood what it meant. That single particle had been moved, controlled, and directed by human technology based on alien knowledge. It was like a caveman successfully creating fire for the first time. A tiny spark that would eventually become a raging inferno. Within 6 months, humanity's greatest scientific minds had gathered in secret laboratories across Earth and its colonies. While the rest of the galaxy focused on conventional physics, antimatter, energy weapons, faster-than-light travel, humans were learning to harness the universe's most abundant but invisible substance. The work was dangerous and difficult. Several scientists died in accidents when experiments went wrong, their bodies torn apart by forces that existed beyond normal reality. But the survivors pressed on, driven by the knowledge that they were on the verge of something revolutionary. They learned to create dark matter fields that could make objects invisible to all known senses. They discovered how to use dark matter as a weapon that could phase through any shield or armor. Most importantly, they figured out how to build ships that existed partially outside normal space-time, making them effectively untouchable by conventional weapons. While the Galactic Space Council was busy laughing at humanity's primitive technology, human engineers were secretly constructing vessels that would make their greatest warships look like paper boats in a hurricane. The aliens had no idea what was coming. The first sign of trouble came from the outer rim sensors, deep in the unexplored, regions beyond the galactic edge. For 3 days, monitoring stations had been picking up strange readings, energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. The readings were so unusual that most technicians assumed their equipment was malfunctioning. They weren't. The invasion began at exactly 1432 Galactic Standard Time on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. Reality itself seemed to tear open like fabric being ripped apart, and through these impossible wounds in space came ships unlike anything anyone had ever seen. They weren't built, they were grown. Massive bioships that looked more like living creatures than spacecraft emerged from what the scientists would later call dark space. Each vessel was easily the size of a small moon, their hulls rippling and pulsing with energy that seemed to come from another dimension entirely. Strange organic patterns covered their surfaces, glowing with colors that had no names in any language. The Zephyrian First Fleet was the closest military force to the invasion point. War Chief Maltheus had been conducting routine patrol exercises with over 200 of his empire's finest warships when the emergency alert started screaming across all communication channels. Unknown vessels detected in Sector 7, reported. His tactical officer, a younger Zephyrian whose voice was tight with confusion. "They're massive, sir. Bigger than anything in our databases." Maltheus felt his warrior's pride surge through his forearms. These were probably some upstart species trying to make a dramatic entrance into galactic politics. He had dealt with similar situations before, and the solution was always the same: overwhelming firepower applied quickly and efficiently. "Battle stations," he commanded, his voice booming across the fleet communication network. "All ships, prepare for combat. Let's show these newcomers what happens when they challenge the Zephyrian Empire." The first volleys were devastating, or should have been. Maltheus watched with growing horror as his antimatter cannons fired their reality-tearing blasts directly at the bioships. The weapons that could vaporize entire planets struck their targets with perfect accuracy and passed right through them like they were shooting at ghosts. "Impossible," Maltheus whispered, his forearms trembling as he stared at the tactical displays. "Our scanners show direct hits, but there's no damage. It's like we're firing at shadows." The bioships responded with weapons that shouldn't have been possible. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, they fired what could only be described as twisted space itself. The attacks hit Maltheus's flagship like invisible hammers, crushing sections of the ship that should have been protected by the strongest armor in the galaxy. "Our shields are useless," Maltheus screamed into his communicator as his flagship began to buckle under forces that his instruments couldn't even measure. "They're not entirely in our dimension. How do you fight an enemy that exists partially, outside reality?" The answer, as it turned out, was that you didn't fight them at all, you died. Within the first hour, half of the Zephyrian First Fleet was destroyed. The bioships moved through space in ways that violated every law of physics. The galaxy understood. They could appear and disappear at will, phase through solid matter, and strike from angles that shouldn't have existed. The emergency call went out to every military force in the galaxy. The Vorth responded first, their crystalline ships arriving in massive formations with their energy shields at maximum power. They had always been proud of their defensive capabilities, boasting that their barriers could stop any weapon ever created. The bioships tore through the Vorth shields like they were made of tissue paper. The proud energy barriers that had protected their civilization for thousands of years collapsed in seconds, leaving their ships defenseless against attacks that came from directions that didn't exist in normal space. Other fleets arrived, the Insectoid Hranxi with their swarm tactics, the gaseous nebuloids with their plasma weapons, the rock-like petroforms with their gravitational manipulators. Each species brought their most advanced technology, their most powerful weapons, their greatest tactical minds. None of it mattered. The bioships were like nightmares made real, operating on principles that no one in the galaxy understood. They could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them nearly impossible to target effectively. Their weapons reached through space-time itself, striking at the very foundations of matter and energy. Within 6 hours, half of the combined galactic fleet was destroyed. Proud civilizations that had ruled space for millennia found themselves helpless against an enemy that shouldn't have been possible. The survivors gathered in the emergency council session, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of panic and desperation. The great powers of the galaxy, the same species that had laughed at humanity just days earlier, were now facing extinction. It was the Trilothian ambassador who finally spoke the words that no one wanted to say. We need help. We need someone who might understand technology beyond our comprehension. The emergency transmission was sent to Earth on priority channels, cutting through the communications restrictions that the Council had placed on humanity just days before. The message was simple and desperate. We need your help. Name your price. Irony was not lost on anyone. The same species they had dismissed as primitive mammals were now their only hope for survival. The emergency council session was unlike anything in galactic history. The great chamber that had once echoed with laughter and mockery now trembled with fear and desperation. Alien delegates who had sat proudly in their elevated seats just days before were now huddled together, their various forms of communication, creating a symphony of panic. Admiral Kim J stood at the center of it all, his human form looking impossibly small among the towering alien representatives. But something had changed in his demeanor since the last council meeting. Gone was the respectful, almost submissive tone he had used before. Now his voice carried the cold authority of someone who held all the cards in a deadly game. You mocked us, he said, his words cutting through the chaos like a blade. The translation systems carried his voice to every corner of the massive chamber, and gradually the panicked conversations died down as thousands of aliens focused on the single human standing before them. Called us primitive, he continued, his dark eyes scanning the assembled delegates with obvious contempt. You laughed when we warned you about threats from beyond your understanding. You voted unanimously to restrict us to our single star system, treating us like children who couldn't be trusted with dangerous toys. War Chief Maltheus, what was left of him, sat slumped in his chair. 2 of his 4 arms were missing, torn, away by bioship weapons that had reached through dimensions to claw at him. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. The bioships, and they destroyed everything. Our antimatter weapons, our armor, our shields, nothing worked against them. Now you beg for our aid, Admiral Kim continued, ignoring the broken war chief. Completely. His voice remained perfectly calm, but underneath the surface every alien in the chamber could sense something that made their various forms of skin crawl with fear. The Vorth Prime Speaker, its crystalline form now cracked and dimmed, from the recent battles, tried to pulse with its former authority. Admiral Kim, we understand your anger, but this threat endangers all life in the galaxy. Surely you won't let pride prevent you from helping us. Kim J smiled, and that smile was more terrifying than any weapon the aliens had ever seen. Help? You? Oh, we will, but first I think it's time you understood exactly who you've been dealing with. The Admiral raised his hand and made a simple gesture toward the massive windows that looked out into space. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The blackness outside remained unchanged, filled only with the usual scatter of distant stars and the wreckage of the recent battles. Then space itself began to shimmer. It started as a barely visible distortion, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but the distortion grew stronger, and reality itself seemed to bend and twist in ways that hurt to look at. The alien delegates pressed themselves against their seats, their various sensory organs struggling to process what they were seeing. 12 massive shapes began to materialize from what could only be described as nothingness. They weren't decloaking or emerging from hiding. They were literally stepping sideways into reality, from somewhere else entirely. The warships that appeared were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each vessel dwarfed the largest council. Dreadnoughts. But their size wasn't what made them terrifying. Their hulls seemed to exist in a constant state of change, flickering between solid matter and something that looked like living shadow. Parts of the ships appeared to fade in and out of existence, as if they were only partially committed to being in the same dimension as everything else. The weapons mounted on these ships defied description. Instead of gun barrels or energy projectors, they had devices that looked like they were designed to tear holes in reality itself. Strange geometric patterns covered their surfaces, similar to the symbols that Dr. Choi Min had found in the ruins. On Europa, but these were active, pulsing with power that made the space around them bend and twist. Captain Li Do's voice crackled through the communication array, and every alien in the chamber felt their blood run cold at the casual confidence in his tone. Dark matter fleet standing by for orders, Admiral. All ships report ready for dimensional combat operations. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. 10,000 alien delegates representing the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy sat in stunned shock as they tried to process what they were seeing. These were the primitive humans they had laughed at. These were the mammals they had dismissed as barely worthy of membership in their galactic community. The Trilothian ambassador, its metallic tentacles trembling uncontrollably, finally managed to speak. How is this possible? Our sensors detect massive energy signatures, but the readings don't match any known technology. These ships appear to be operating on principles that our science says are impossible. Admiral Kim Jae's smile grew wider. Your science, he said, emphasizing the word with obvious disdain. You've been so proud of your antimatter weapons, your energy shields, your faster-than-light drives. You thought you were the peak of technological achievement in the universe. He gestured again toward the window, where the 12 dark matter warships hung in space like sleeping gods. While you were playing with conventional physics, we learned to harness the universe's most abundant substance. While you built weapons that work within the normal laws of reality, we created tools that can rewrite those laws entirely. The truth hit the alien delegates like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't just been hiding their military strength. They had transcended everything the galaxy thought was possible. The bioships that had destroyed their fleets with ease were nothing compared to what the humans had created. War Chief Maltheus looked up with his remaining functional eye. You could have helped us from the beginning. You could have prevented all those deaths. Kim Jae's expression didn't change. Yes, he said simply. We could have, but you chose to treat us with contempt instead of respect. Actions have consequences, even for galactic superpowers. The revelation was complete. The galaxy's supposed masters had just discovered they were children playing with toys, while the species they had mocked held weapons that could reshape reality itself. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when the galaxy's understanding of warfare changed forever. What had seemed impossible to the Council's greatest military minds became reality, as humanity's dark matter fleet engaged the extragalactic invaders in combat that defied everything anyone thought they knew about physics. Commander Park Hyun stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Incheon watching tactical displays that showed information no other species in the galaxy could even detect. Where the aliens saw empty space, her instruments revealed the hidden structure of reality itself, the dark matter networks that connected everything in the universe like invisible highways. All ships, prepare for dimensional combat, she announced calmly. Her voice carried across the fleet's communication network to 11 other vessels, each one commanded by officers who had trained for years to fight battles that shouldn't be possible. The bioships responded to the human fleet's appearance exactly as expected. Their organic hulls rippled with otherworldly energy as they prepared to unleash the same weapons that had devastated the Council's forces. Massive tentacles of twisted spacetime reached out toward the human ships, attacks that had previously torn through the strongest armor and shields in the galaxy. But when the attacks struck, something unprecedented happened. The dark matter. Warships simply weren't there anymore. The human vessels had phased partially out of normal reality, existing in a state between dimensions that made them effectively untouchable by conventional weapons. The bioship's attacks passed through them, like trying to grab smoke with bare hands. Phase transition complete, reported the tactical officer aboard the Incheon. All ships now operating at 70% reality coefficient. Enemy weapons are ineffective. Commander Park Hyun nodded with satisfaction. This was exactly what humanity's scientists had discovered in those ancient ruins on Europa. The ability to exist partially outside normal spacetime wasn't just a defensive measure. It opened up offensive possibilities that no other species had ever imagined. "Begin attack pattern Delta 7, she ordered. "Target their dimensional anchor points." What happened next was beyond the comprehension of the watching alien delegates. The human warships began to move in ways that violated every law of physics the galaxy understood. They didn't accelerate or decelerate. They simply appeared in different locations instantaneously, as if they were teleporting across the battlefield, but it wasn't teleportation. The ships were moving through folded space-time, using the dark matter networks to travel between points in reality without crossing the space in between. One moment a human warship would be thousands of kilometers away from a bioship, and the next moment it would be directly alongside it, weapons charging. The human weapons themselves were unlike anything ever created. Instead of energy beams or physical projectiles, they fired what could only be described as weaponized dark matter. The torpedoes that emerged from the human ships were invisible to normal sensors, existing in the same partially real state as the ships that launched them. These dark matter torpedoes had a terrifying capability. They could phase through any form of protection and materialize directly inside enemy vessels. The bioship's exotic defenses, which had easily deflected antimatter weapons and energy beams, were completely useless against attacks that bypassed them entirely. The first bioship to be struck by human weapons died in a way that shocked even the battle-hardened human crews. The dark matter torpedo materialized inside the creature's central nervous system and detonated, not with explosive force, but by disrupting the fundamental forces that held the ship's biological structure together. The massive bioship, which had been pulsing with alien life just moments before, suddenly went completely still. Its organic hull began to collapse inward as the molecular bonds that kept it intact simply stopped working. Within seconds, a vessel the size of a small moon had been reduced to a drifting cloud of organic debris. "Direct hit on target Alpha 1, reported the weapons officer. "Enemy vessel has been neutralized." Commander Park Hyun watched the tactical display with professional satisfaction. "All ships, continue the attack pattern. These invaders may be masters of biological warfare, but they're still bound by the normal laws of physics. We are not." The battle continued with results that would have been impossible to predict just hours earlier. The bioships that had easily destroyed the galaxy's greatest fleets found themselves completely outmatched by human technology that operated on principles they couldn't understand. Every time the bioships tried to adapt their tactics, the humans were already 3 steps ahead. When the invaders attempted to phase shift their own vessels to match the human strategy, the dark matter weapons simply adjusted their dimensional frequency to compensate. The extragalactic invaders had conquered dozens of galaxies using their mastery of biological warfare and their ability to exist partially outside normal reality, but they had never encountered an enemy that could match their dimensional capabilities while simultaneously attacking them with weapons that struck directly at the quantum level. One by one, the massive bioships collapsed as humanity's weapons found their targets. The creatures that had seemed invincible just hours before were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they couldn't see coming and couldn't effectively fight back against. "Final enemy vessel has been neutralized," reported the tactical officer. "All bioships in this sector have been destroyed." Commander Park Hyun allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The battle had lasted less than 2 hours, but it had proven something that would change the galaxy forever. Humanity wasn't just another species with advanced technology. They had transcended the normal limitations of physics itself. The watching alien delegates sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The primitive humans had just accomplished something that their combined fleets couldn't manage. They had defeated an enemy that seemed invincible, using methods that shouldn't have been possible. The galaxy's power structure had just changed. Forever. The victory celebration lasted exactly 47 minutes. That's how long it took for the galaxy's major powers to shift from grateful relief to calculating greed, and finally to barely concealed terror at what humanity had revealed. In the Great Council chamber, the mood had changed completely from the desperate panic of just hours before. The alien delegates were no longer cowering in fear of the extragalactic invaders. Instead, they were staring at the human representatives with a mixture of hunger and suspicion that was far more dangerous than simple gratitude. Warchief Maltheus was the first to break the uncomfortable silence. Despite his injuries from the bioship attacks, he had managed to pull himself upright in his chair, his remaining two arms crossed in what his species considered a position of authority. The Zephyrian Empire demands immediate access to this dark matter technology, he announced, his voice still weak but filled with the arrogance that had defined his species for centuries. As the primary military force in this galaxy, we have the right to possess weapons capable of defending against future threats. The statement sent ripples of murmurs through the assembled delegates. Other species began voicing similar demands, each one claiming they deserved access to humanity's secrets for various reasons. The Vorth insisted their energy manipulation expertise made them natural partners for dark matter research. The Trelothians argued that their industrial capacity was necessary for large-scale production of the new weapons. Admiral Kim Jae listened to it all with an expression that revealed nothing, but Dr. Park Soo, seated behind him, was recording every word, every gesture, every micro-expression that crossed the alien faces around them. The neural implant in her skull was working overtime, cataloging the political maneuvering that was already beginning. "We saved your lives," Admiral Kim finally said, his voice cutting through the growing chaos. "And your first thought is to demand our secrets so you can use them against us later." The Trilothian ambassador's metallic tentacles writhed with what appeared to be indignation. "You speak of using weapons against allies, Admiral. We merely seek to ensure the galaxy's continued protection against external threats." But Admiral Kim's smile was cold and knowing. "External threats? Is that what you call it when you're already planning how to divide up human space among yourselves?" The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others began making urgent gestures to their aides. The political calculations were obvious to anyone who cared to look. Humanity had just proven they possessed technology that made every other military force in the galaxy obsolete. The logical response from species that had ruled through military might for millennia was to either acquire that technology or eliminate the threat it represented. 3 days later, aboard the research vessel, Sejong, Dr. Choi Min sat surrounded by monitoring equipment that would have impressed the galaxy's greatest intelligence agencies. The ship itself was one of humanity's new dark matter vessels, invisible to conventional sensors and capable of observing alien communications without being detected. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," she reported to Admiral Kim via encrypted quantum communication. Her screen showed intercepts of messages between various alien governments, and the content was exactly what any human strategist would have predicted. The Zephyrian Empire was secretly negotiating with the Vorth Collective about a joint operation to capture human vessels and reverse engineer their technology. The Trilothians were offering industrial partnerships to other species in exchange for support in a future conflict with humanity. Even smaller governments were forming coalitions, united by their shared fear of human capabilities. The Hrangxi Swarm Queen sent a message to the Petroform Council just 2 hours ago, Dr. Choi continued, reading from her data streams. Quote, "The mammals have revealed themselves as the true threat to galactic stability. Their weapons make our greatest achievements look like children's toys. We must act before they decide we are expendable." Admiral Kim's voice came through the speakers with grim satisfaction. "They're planning to move against us. Fear makes them stupid." Dr. Choi Min nodded, though he couldn't see her. "The preliminary estimates suggest they're organizing a coalition of at least 40 species. They're calling it a preemptive defense, initiative in their internal communications, but the tactical planning documents make their real intentions clear. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The same species that had dismissed humanity as primitive and insignificant were now so terrified of human capabilities that they were willing to risk everything in a desperate attempt to eliminate the threat. But they had made a crucial mistake in their calculations. They were still thinking in terms of conventional warfare, planning strategies based on the assumption that superior numbers and traditional weapons would be enough to overwhelm humanity's technological advantages. They had no idea that humanity's dark matter capabilities extended far beyond just weapons and ships. The monitoring systems aboard the Sejong were detecting their secret communications from distances that should have been impossible. Human intelligence networks were tracking their military movements in real time. Most importantly, humanity's scientists had already developed countermeasures for every weapon system in the alien arsenal. "Good," Admiral Kim replied, and Dr. Choi could hear the cold calculation in his voice. "Let them reveal their true nature. Let them show the galaxy exactly what kind of civilized species they really are when they think their survival is at stake." The plan was already in motion. Humanity had anticipated this response from the moment they decided to reveal their true capabilities. The grateful allies would become terrified enemies within days, and when they finally worked up the courage to attack, they would discover that their target had been prepared for them all along. "We'll be ready," Admiral Kim continued, "and when they make their move, the galaxy will see once and for all who the real primitives are." The price of the galaxy's arrogance was about to come due, and humanity would be the ones collecting payment. The attempted rebellion lasted exactly 18 hours and 37 minutes. When the combined alien fleet finally attacked humanity's positions, expecting to overwhelm them with superior numbers, they discovered that their every move had been tracked, predicted, and countered before they even began. The battle was so one-sided that calling it a battle was almost insulting to the concept of warfare. The alien coalition brought nearly 3,000 warships from 42 different species, representing the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. They had coordinated their attack patterns, combined their most advanced technologies, and planned their assault with the precision of master tacticians. None of it mattered. The human dark matter fleet had been waiting for them. The coalition's ships were destroyed or disabled within the first hour, their crews rescued by human vessels that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Not a single human ship was lost, and casualties among the alien forces were kept to a minimum. Humanity wanted prisoners, not martyrs. Admiral Kim Jae stood before the emergency council session that followed, his expression showing no trace of satisfaction or anger. Behind him, holographic displays showed the wreckage of the coalition fleet, a sobering reminder of what happened when anyone challenged humanity's new position in the galaxy. "The age of your so-called galactic civilization is over," he announced to the assembled delegates, many of whom were now restrained in energy fields after their government's participation in the failed attack. "Your species have proven that you cannot be trusted with the power you've wielded for so long." The new terms were presented without room for negotiation. Humanity would establish oversight of all major military decisions made by Council species. Territorial wars between alien governments would cease immediately. Any species that refused to accept human authority would find themselves completely isolated, cut off from galactic trade and communication networks. The most shocking revelation was how thoroughly humanity had infiltrated galactic society. Their dark matter sensors could detect any fleet movement anywhere in the galaxy, making secret military operations impossible. Their ships could appear anywhere without warning, making defensive planning futile. Their technology was so advanced that resistance was not just futile, it was literally impossible. War Chief Maltheus, now missing 3 of his 4 arms and most of his pride, spoke for many when he asked, "How long have you been watching us? How long have you known about our plans?" Admiral Kim's smile was cold and informative. "We've been monitoring your communications since the day you first laughed at us in this chamber. Every secret meeting, every private conversation, every military strategy session. We heard it all. But even as humanity established its new order across the galaxy, disturbing information was emerging from the interrogation of captured bioship crews. The extragalactic invaders, it turned out, weren't conquerors at all. They were refugees. Dr. Bay1 worked around the clock in her laboratory, aboard the research station Dejon, studying the testimonies of the surviving bioship creatures. What she discovered kept her awake for days, staring at data that made her question everything they thought they knew about the universe. They weren't trying to conquer our galaxy, she reported to the Emergency Science Council. They were running, away from something in their home region, something that made them so desperate they were willing to flee across the void between galaxies. The bioship creatures, when properly communicated with, told a story of terror that chilled even the most experienced human xenobiologists. Their home galaxy had been consumed by what they called the Devourers, entities that existed beyond the normal dimensions of space and time. They describe beings that feed on reality itself, Dr. Bay1 continued, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Not just matter and energy, but the fundamental forces that hold the universe together. Entire star systems didn't just die, they ceased to exist as if they had never been there at all. The implications were staggering. If the bioship refugees were telling the truth, then something existed in the universe that made their own dimensional capabilities look primitive by comparison. The Devourers apparently moved through reality like sharks through water, consuming everything they encountered and leaving behind nothing. What could make these beings run in terror? Dr. Bay1 wondered aloud during one of her research sessions. These bioships had weapons that could phase through normal matter, defenses that operated outside conventional physics. They were masters of dimensional warfare, and yet they fled their home galaxy rather than face whatever was coming. The answer came from one of the more cooperative bioship prisoners, a creature that resembled a cross between a jellyfish and a living computer. Its method of communication was complex, involving changes in electromagnetic fields that took weeks for human scientists to decode properly. The Devourers do not destroy, it finally managed to convey. They unmake. They consume. The very concept of existence itself. Where they pass, there is not emptiness, there is nothing. No space, no time, no possibility that anything was ever there. The creature's testimony described a form of warfare that operated on principles beyond anything humanity had discovered, even with their mastery of dark matter manipulation. The Devourers could apparently attack the basic structure of reality itself, unraveling the quantum foundations that allowed matter and energy to exist. The bioships ran because fighting was impossible, Dr. Bay1 reported to Admiral Kim. How do you battle an enemy that can erase you from existence itself? How do you defend against weapons that attack the very concept of being? The galactic community, now under human oversight, began to understand the true scope of the threat they faced. The extragalactic invasion hadn't been the main event. It had been a desperate escape attempt by refugees fleeing something far worse. And according to the bioship prisoners' calculations, the Devourers were still coming. Their consumption of the bioship's home galaxy was nearly complete, and their attention was already turning toward new sources of reality to consume. The galaxy now had a new hierarchy with humanity at the top, but that hierarchy might not matter if there was nothing left to rule over. 6 months had passed since humanity revealed their true power to the galaxy, and the changes had been more dramatic than anyone could have imagined. The once chaotic borders between alien empires had stabilized under human oversight. Wars that had raged for centuries ended within weeks when both sides realized that humanity was monitoring every military movement and would intervene if necessary. The Great Council Chamber, where alien delegates had once laughed at human representatives, now operated under completely different rules. Every major decision required approval from human observers, and the arrogant species that had once dominated galactic politics found themselves asking permission for actions they had previously taken without thought. But the most significant change was barely visible to most of the galaxy's inhabitants. Along the outer rim, where the darkness of intergalactic space met the edge of known civilization, humanity's dark matter fleet maintained a constant vigil. 12 massive warships, invisible to conventional sensors, patrolled the vast emptiness beyond the furthest stars. Admiral Kim Jae had requested command of the Rim Patrol personally. While other human officers managed the political situation, in the core worlds, he preferred the solitude of the galactic edge. Here, aboard the flagship Admiral Yi, he could think clearly about the challenges humanity faced in their new role as galactic protectors. The bridge of the Admiral Yi was unlike anything the alien species had ever imagined. Instead of the cramped, instrument-filled command centers typical of conventional warships, this vessel's bridge was a sphere of dark matter-enhanced displays that showed information in dimensions beyond normal space-time. Reality itself bent around the ship's sensors, giving the crew awareness of threats that existed in parallel dimensions. "Status report," Admiral Kim requested as he made his daily rounds of the bridge stations. Commander Park Hyun looked up from her tactical displays. "All patrol sectors remain clear, Admiral. The bioship prisoners continue to provide intelligence about devourer capabilities, though much of it contradicts our understanding of physics." Dr. Choi Min, now permanently assigned to the fleet as Chief Science Officer, had spent months analyzing the testimonies from captured bioship creatures. What she had learned painted a picture of an enemy that operated on principles so alien that even humanity's advanced technology might not be sufficient. "The devourers don't just attack matter and energy," she had explained during countless briefing sessions. "They attack the fundamental concepts that allow reality to exist. They can apparently erase the basic laws of physics in localized areas, creating zones where nothing can function." Admiral Kim nodded thoughtfully as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The bioship refugees had been surprisingly cooperative once they realized that humanity represented their best hope for survival. Their descriptions of the devourers were consistent but terrifying. Entities that consumed reality itself, leaving behind voids that were somehow worse than empty space. Sensor operator Young Min sat at the most advanced monitoring station ever created, her consciousness partially linked to dark matter detection networks that stretched beyond the galactic rim. Through this connection, she could perceive threats approaching from distances that conventional sensors couldn't even imagine reaching. For 6 months, her readings had shown nothing but the normal background patterns of intergalactic space. The dark matter networks that connected all galaxies showed their usual slow, steady flows of invisible energy. Everything appeared peaceful and stable. Then, at exactly 14:23 Galactic Standard Time, everything changed. "Admiral!" Jung Min called out, her voice tight with alarm that immediately got everyone's attention. "I'm detecting massive dark matter signatures approaching from beyond the galactic edge. The readings they're not like anything in our databases." Admiral Kim was at her station within seconds, studying displays that showed information only a handful of humans in the galaxy could interpret. What he saw made his blood run cold. The dark matter networks that should have shown the familiar patterns of intergalactic space were twisted into configurations that hurt to look at directly. "Distance and speed?" he asked, his voice remaining calm despite the implications of what they were seeing. "Approximately 50,000 light-years out and closing," Young-min reported, her hands flying over controls that interfaced directly with her neural implants. "But Admiral, they're not moving through normal space. They're traveling by unmaking. The space between here and there, reality itself is collapsing in their wake." Commander Park Hyun activated the fleet-wide communication network. "All ships, battle stations, prepare for dimensional combat operations against unknown enemy forces." Dr. Choi Min studied the sensor readings with growing horror. "These patterns match the bioship descriptions exactly. Admiral, this isn't just an invasion force. The devourers have found us." Admiral Kim Jae nodded grimly, his mind already shifting into the tactical mode that had served him well throughout his military career. Whatever the bioship invaders had been fleeing was finally here, and it fell to humanity to stand against. A threat that could apparently erase the very concept of existence. "Send a priority alert to Earth Command and all human installations," he ordered. "Inform them that the primary threat has arrived and that we are engaging as planned." The plan had been in development for months, ever since the first bioship. Testimonies revealed the true nature of what was coming. Humanity's greatest scientific minds had worked around the clock to develop weapons and defenses that might work against enemies that attacked reality itself. Youngmin continue monitoring their approach. I want constant updates on their speed and capabilities. Yes, sir. Admiral, there's something else. The dark matter disturbances they're creating. They're not random. There's a pattern to them. Like they're testing our dimensional defenses before they arrive. Admiral Kim smiled grimly. Good, let them test. They're about to discover that the species they're approaching isn't the same one that fled from them before. The universe was about to learn why humans had earned their place as the reluctant protectors of thousands of species who had once mocked them. The Devourers might have consumed entire galaxies, but they had never faced an enemy that could match their mastery of dimensional warfare. The final battle for the survival of reality itself was about to begin.